Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. What's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, January 14th, 2021, and this is episode 23 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. Welcome back, folks. I got a great lineup for you. Later on, I'm going to talk through some of my thoughts about crafting authentic classrooms for you and your students. But before we get into that, I've got some education news and updates, and then we'll take a little look in the treasure chest. So there are some Microsoft EDU updates. I'm not super up on a lot of Microsoft stuff. Our district is not a Microsoft district, but I am trying to keep up with some of the things that are going on because some of those things do integrate with stuff that I use. But Microsoft just announced last week that OneNote and H5P will now be integrated together. H5P is a tool that allows teachers to create, share, and reuse interactive content. And so now Microsoft OneNote will be able to embed some of those H5P interactive pages, being able to organize them or distribute them to others in your OneNote class notebook. So be looking out for that. There's a lot of H5P templates and ready-made stuff out there for teachers to use. So it's a great way to take some of that static information and make it a little bit more engaging, a little bit more dynamic. Additionally, Microsoft has announced that they are jumping on the breakout room wagon, and Microsoft Teams will now include the ability to create breakout rooms and virtual breakout rooms for classes. So all of these video meeting software programs are giving us that ability to use breakout rooms. So those of you who are fully virtual should be able to make good use of all of that. In Google News, Google has now added Smart Compose and spelling autocorrect to comments in Google Docs. So if you've been using Google, you know in Gmail and in Google Docs, there's the Smart Compose, which will kind of predict what you're going to say. And as you're typing, you can just hit tab and it will fill that in to be able to type stuff a lot quicker. And we've always had the autocorrect and spelling correct. Now that's going to be available in comments that you add. So those of you who type too fast and make all those mistakes and then hit enter before you realize what you've done, now Google will predict what you're going to say and even tell you how to spell it better. And finally, in some Canva news, if any of you are not using Canva for education, I would highly recommend it. I love using Canva. It's a great tool to use. And now they have a background remover. So I just came across this the other day. I jumped on there to create something real quick. And all of a sudden I noticed that there was a background remover option right there at the top of the page, and I love it. Now there's a lot of sites out there that will do this. Remove.bg is kind of one of the predominant ones that I use, but to be able to do that within a Canva design now, it's a great thing. So it keeps me several clicks away from having to go to a site like remove.bg, remove it, download it, upload it to Canva and all that. So I think that that's awesome. I'm super excited about that. So if you are a Canva user, look for that option. So that takes care of news and updates. Now it's time to pop open the treasure chest and see what's inside. So my my tip for this week it's another Google app tip, and that is the activity dashboard button. So if you don't know about this, this is a great thing, especially for those of y'all who are in virtual teaching sessions. The activity dashboard will show you who has accessed your document. So if you look up at the top right corner next to the share and the comment button, you'll see a little button with like a jagged arrow like you would see on an analytics chart kind of thing. If you click on that, it opens up the activity dashboard. And what you'll see is, at first you'll see it'll show you viewers. So the first thing, kind of default, it will show you who all the document is shared with, and it will tell you the last time that they accessed that document. And then there's another little tab you can click over to, and you can see all viewers. So you can see everybody who has accessed that document whenever. You can also see things like viewer trends, which will show you how many people were on the document at a given time. You can see the sharing history and privacy settings. But the viewers is the biggest thing for me. So it's a great accountability measure for any kind of document that you might share out with your students. So let's say you've got a document with instructions on an assignment that you share out with your students, and then you have a student who says, "Oh, I didn't see it. I didn't know we were supposed to do it, or I didn't know what to do." And then if you open up the activity dashboard, you can actually, click and see, did they actually open it up or not? And you can see how much time they spent on it, and so you can be like, well, no, actually last period you opened it up and I see that you were looking at it. So again, it's one of those kind of accountability measures and helps you keep up. So those of you who are teaching virtually right now, this could be a good way to keep up with if your students are keeping up with documents that you're sharing out with them. Well, that will take care of news and updates. We got a new little treasure out of the chest. So next up, we're going to level up. We're going to learn how to create some authentic classroom environments. Up next is the boss battle. All right, 8-Bit Warriors, let's get ready to jump into battle, and we're going to come out victorious in the end. So today I'm talking about how to craft your own authentic classroom. And if you've been listening to the show, the whole premise of the 8-Bit Instructor is to create authentic learning experiences in your classrooms, not just for you, but also for your students. And so the whole idea is creating an atmosphere of learning, but not one that is kind of a false sense of learning. And a lot of you probably know what I'm talking about, and I'll get into it as I dive into some of the points and the questions that we're looking at today. So before I get into the kind of how, what I want to look at is why. Why do this? Why bother spending time doing things that you don't have to do in class? Why can't I just come into my classroom, teach my students, and leave? And to a certain extent, you can. But a lot of this stuff is not that much extra. It's just taking what's already there and making good use of it. And so the shortened version of why do it is essentially because it helps break down barriers that students have in class. I've taught English for 14 years now, and I've always had students who sit in my class and tell me how much they hate English, they hate writing, they hate reading. And so there are already barriers set up from day one, and a lot of this stuff helps break down those barriers. Now, I'm not going to say that this is 100% foolproof. Nothing that I ever talk about is ever a 100% guarantee. But what I do know is that it does help. I've watched struggling students become a little bit more open. I've had students who have told me at the end of the year that they have never liked reading until they came into my class, or I've even had instances of students telling me this is the first time that I've ever read a whole book for a class and actually enjoyed it. Or, on the writing side of things, where I've had students who come in and really are anti-writing, that it's hard to get just a sentence out of them. And by the end, they're composing stuff that's a lot more than that. And it's not just an English thing. There are students in math, in science, social studies who will come in day one and say that they hate doing this. And so the whole idea of this is to help create that atmosphere that will break down some of those barriers. Now, a lot of this stuff centers around kind of two parts of my 8-bit instructor philosophy. And if you remember back episode 1, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, I use the acronym COMIC just as an easy way for me to remember some of these things. COMIC is C for cultivating relationships, O for optimizing class time, M for maximizing potential, I for integrating technology, and C for challenging students. And those are kind of like my recipe for a really great, authentic learning environment. And what I'm talking about today mostly focuses on two of these aspects. One is cultivating relationships, because in my opinion, that is number one. If you don't have those relationships with students, then it's going to be a difficult road. And then the other is the idea of integrating technology. So those are kind of the two focal points here. And again, I will just say, if you have this kind of attitude of my job is just to teach them, I shouldn't have to do anything else, I understand that. But also, I realize just in my tenure, I have seen a huge shift. And whether we like it or not, this is just kind of the reality we live in as teachers with the students that we have. Technology is a part of their culture. And so we have to find ways of making use of it and being able to work with them on that. We have to be understanding of them and all that. So as I get into this, I would start with just kind of two questions. And these are two questions that I've kind of looked at and things that I use to really hone in what my class is like. The first question is simply, who are you? As a person, who are you? You might even just sit down and kind of write out some of those ideas that come to mind. What do you like? What are you interested in? What kind of hobbies do you have? All that kind of stuff. Who are you? And then the second question is simply, who are your students? What is the makeup of your class? What kind of students do you have? And I know that changes from year to year, that changes from class period to class period, and all that, but that is something to kind of take into consideration. So bearing that in mind, I really have kind of three areas that I'm looking at today as far as how we create this atmosphere in our classroom. And the first area that I'm going to talk about is simply class decor, the physical layout of your room. Most classrooms are white linoleum with white concrete walls and rows of desks. And, if you walk into a room like that, it's very uninviting. It seems very distant, very cold, just a place where you probably don't want to be. And so a couple of questions that I can ask myself and I looked at is, one, how can you add your personality to the room? And kind of in that same vein, what do you want your students to know about you? So I try to hang stuff up on my walls that really show my personality and who I am. So like I have a big Atlanta United flag hanging up behind my desk. because I love, watching soccer, and I'm a Atlanta fan, even though we've been having some tough years recently. I've got an Iron Man mask that I found on clearance for like $2, and I decided I wanted to kind of make a little lamp, and so I can flip the lamp on and his eyes will kind of glow and light up and all that. I stuck that on a shelf in my room because I'm a big nerd, and so when my students walk in my room, they can immediately see some of the things that I'm interested in. When they leave, they see a little wooden plaque over the door that says "May the Force be with you," and it's little things like that I just kind of set up to help my students see who I am. And it helps me make connections with them because, a lot of people will come in and they'll say, hey, that's a cool Iron Man mask, or I love that, or whatever. Or they'll see my Atlanta United flag and ask me, you like soccer? And I'll get to tell them about, going to the 2018 MLS Cup when Atlanta won, and just the awesome time. And so it naturally leads into conversations with my students to, again, engage with them and kind of lower those guards that they put up when they walk into a classroom. Which leads me kind of to the next question that I have, which is, how can you make your classroom feel welcoming? Maybe you don't want to put up, pictures of you and your family or things that you have a hobby, but what can you do to make that classroom more inviting? And again, this is just my opinion, but stark white walls and floors and all of that is just not welcoming. It doesn't seem like maybe you want students to be in there. So how can you soften it up? What can you add in there? Posters. And it can be stuff with your subject area, but think about other things along with your subject area that can add some personality to the classroom. So, every science classroom has the periodic table on it, but, what if you had posters of stuff that has, like science jokes? I know some science teachers in my school who have a lot of just like humorous science stuff in there, and I love it because that really shows the person that they are without it being necessarily overly personal. And then the last kind of thing, which is something new that I've kind of come across, is how can you design your class material around these ideas? So, for example, I tweeted this out a few weeks ago. I've been theming out my 9 weeks. And so third 9 weeks, what we're currently in, my theme is video games, just because I like video games. So I started making some template slides in Google Slides with video game themes. So I've got, a Mario, and I've got Sonic, and I've got Final Fantasy, and I've got Legend of Zelda. And I just set them up in the master slides to go along with that theme. But it's a simple little process, and I do a lot of this kind of stuff anyway, so it was not difficult for me, but it's a simple process to do that, and I've got those templates set up, and so then every day I use those templates in class, and again, it just gives a different feel. It's not just that standard Google Slides theme that everybody sees everywhere. It's very custom to my classroom. And I'm not saying that you have to go overboard with graphic design and all that kind of stuff, but think about ways that you can add little touches to the materials that you put in your class. It could just be something as simple as, some like clip art of things that you like that you put on a document, or I've seen teachers who put, like little joke comic strips at the end of their sheets where you got like a little Calvin Hobbes or a little Peanuts comic strip at the end, just to add a little humor to some of the things that they go in. So instead of just having those very plain kind of material things, what are some ways that you could really add your own personal touch to that? Think about that. So the next area we want to take a look at is the idea of cultivating relationships with students. And I could probably talk about this all day. That is, I think, my number one enjoyment that I get out of my job is the relationships that I have with students. I could probably take the standards in the English out, and I would still fill up every single day with stuff to do with students just because I really enjoy interacting with them. And so a few questions to consider as you're looking at developing those relationships and cultivating strong relationships with your students. One, how do you interact with your students? Think about the way from the first time they see you walking into your classroom until they leave at the end of the class period. How do you treat them? So, one, first impression's always a great thing, and that's a daily kind of thing. So I think a lot of schools have teachers standing outside their door, mostly in the sense of monitoring the hallways as students are walking and transitioning. But think about how you can utilize that time. Greeting students at the door is a huge thing. But again, who are you? How do you interact with them? We've gone through training about things like capturing kids' hearts and all that kind of stuff. And, one of the things was big was shaking their hands every day that they walk into class. And, I was doing that last year. Obviously, I'm not doing that a lot this year. But how do you greet them at the door? Asking them how they're doing, genuinely caring about their day. And finding those unique ways to greet them. So last year, it started with a handshake for everybody, but a lot of them turned into some of those specialized kind of handshakes. Again, that's nothing that I did or that I actively pursued. It's just something that just kind of naturally happened as I continued to develop those relationships with those students. Another thing to consider is finding out about them, finding out their interests. Let them teach you something. When you talk to them, what are things that they're interested in? Maybe you don't know a whole lot about it. Let them be the teacher for a change. Ask them questions. Get them to show you things that they're creating. If they're artists, they want you to see the things that they're drawing and painting. If they're musicians or whatever, they want you to see the stuff that they're creating. And I think it's important a lot of times to be able to take a few seconds to look at something like that. Or even if it's just like, hey, let me look at it when we get done with this or at the end of class, but then make sure you follow up with that. And then to kind of go along with that, my encouragement is to find time to have non-content discussions with students. I think there are so many times that students, all we talk to them about is our content area. And that's not a bad thing. That's our job. We're supposed to be teaching them content stuff. But there's a reason why students think teachers live in their classrooms. And that's because it seems to be the only thing about them. And so I like to try to arrange my room and find times to be able to talk to them about things that are not just specifically English related. And again, a lot of that has just what you are comfortable with doing. You may not want to get into in-depth conversations with them about certain topics, but you might, on the other hand. You may not have time to have a lot of conversations, but maybe, again, beginning into the class, you take some time while they're getting unpacked and settled in to just have a conversation with them about that. And then the last thing, I talked about first impressions, greeting them at the door, and think about the way that you interact with them at the end of class. So, there's kind of a popular saying that, a lot of times people remember the first thing you said to them and the last thing that you said to them. So how are you leaving them at the end of the day? What kind of encouragement can you give them going out the door? And this is a great place to, a lot of teachers have their little catchphrases that they like to use. And it's the ones that stick with students going, on and on through the years. I know several teachers and professors that I've had where it was like, they ended the class the same way every time. And it stuck with me throughout the years. Maybe that's a great thing that you can do. And all of that overall, whether it's greeting them, talking to them in class, encouraging them as they leave, the biggest thing I would encourage you to do is with cultivating those relationships is, how are you actually talking to them? And I've talked a few times about the whole idea of sarcasm, and sarcasm is the language of teenagers. So I hear this all the time, and even some of the younger grades and all that kind of stuff. But think about how much sarcasm you're using with them. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but what I'm saying is they take a lot of that stuff to heart. Even if they know that you're joking with them, it's something that can really stick with them. So I would encourage everybody to be as positive as you can with them. Use positive language, use positive interactions. If you're sarcastic with students, that's fine. I always have students that are really great to go back and forth with, but make sure that that's not the predominant mode of communication that you have with them. The last thing that I like to look at with creating authentic learning environments is how we integrate technology in our class. So this is a huge thing, and I won't get into a ton of stuff with it. All I want to do is throw some thoughts at you to consider as you're utilizing technology. So, technology is just, it's a part of our lives now. There's not much getting around it. So I think to have zero use in class, I think is maybe a little outdated, possibly. But that doesn't mean that you have to go overboard with it. So my first comment about the idea of integrating technology is to simply use what you're comfortable with. How good are you with technology? Whether you are beginner, intermediate, expert, what's your level of technology use? Stay in that level. That doesn't mean you can't learn, you can't grow. Don't try to use something that's way above your head. Part of what allows technology to be effective in class is your confidence in using it. So, I would say most people can use Microsoft Word or Google Docs. They can create PowerPoints or some basic Google Slides. If that's you, make use of that and utilize that in class. Students can see through the copy and paste lessons. And I think that's one of the things that kind of gets on my nerves the most is when somebody just literally copies and pastes something into their class and doesn't consider anything about it. You can tell that they're not ready for it. You can tell that they don't know what you're supposed to do with it. We've had teachers who, when we would use Google Forms for something, they would copy the same link instead of making a copy of the Google form. And then a teacher gets all of a different teacher's responses because it's coming on their own Google form. And then you're messed up. You don't know what to do, and it's clear, to the students that teacher doesn't really know what to do. Teachers to Pay Teachers is a great site, but I know teachers who just get on there, buy something, print it out, and give it to their students without even looking at it. And things like that, that's when technology becomes a hindrance, when we're just, out of our depth with some of those technologies. And always keep in mind that technology does not replace good teachers. Good teachers will teach their students regardless of what kind of technology they have. Technology should be used as a tool to help good teachers. And so if you've listened to other podcasts, there's several other podcasters out there that have their kind of spin on technology, but it all boils down to the same idea, which is technology is not the purpose. Technology is the medium. So what is it that you want your students to learn? That's the first question. The second question is, how can I use technology to help them do this more efficiently or to deepen their learning? So it starts with a skill, it ends with the technology. And again, I would just encourage you, use what you're comfortable with. I just heard on Jake Miller's podcast, he was talking about the analogy that he uses is using a tool belt. And when you're doing construction projects, you only pick certain tools to do, and they're tools that you are comfortable with and that you know how to use. Technology is the same way. Make sure you take time to figure something out before you try to throw it at your students. So as you move forward from this, hopefully you got some tips and some encouragement to help create that really authentic atmosphere in your classroom. And just keep in mind, it's not a complete overhaul. These are just little tweaks that you can make along the way to help break down those barriers with students. Well, let's consider that battle won, and let's gain some of those experience points and continue to level up. Up next, your feedback question of the week. All right, folks, it's time for you to be a part of the show. This week's question of the week: what unique things do you bring into your classroom? What are some ways that you bring your own personal style, personal flavor into your classroom? Tweet me your responses. Use the hashtag 8BitCrew. Tag me at ComicSocks. Or if you got longer posts, you can post in the comment section on the episode page. Well, that will just about wrap up this episode. Make sure to listen next week. Katie Powell, author of Boredom Busters, joins me and talks a little bit about the idea behind the book and her philosophy of Teach Beyond the Desk. And we get even a little bit into online teaching for this year. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. I'm everywhere. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of it. So look for it, hit that subscribe button, and leave me a review. Keep it up. Keep getting out there and doing what you're doing. You are making a difference, and you are doing a good job. And until next week, may your swords stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ComicSocks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week.